This is cold logic, an intelligence briefing on what truly matters beneath the headlines. It began with a truck. Early morning light filtered over a Home Depot parking lot in Los Angeles. Day laborers waited by the curb, hoping for work. When a Penske moving truck pulled up, the driver leaned out and called for help, looking for men to load, move, work. They approached. Then the back of the truck opened. What spilled out was not furniture, but federal agents. 16 people were arrested in that operation. It had been named Operation Trojan Horse. Border Patrol agents, using a rented vehicle from a civilian company, infiltrated a laborer gathering under the guise of employment. The company, Penske, quickly released a statement. They claimed no prior knowledge and stated they did not authorize use of their vehicles for such an operation. The message was clear. Federal agencies are escalating immigration enforcement in unconventional and highly controversial ways. But this was not just about 16 arrests. This was about control, about message, and about the broader architecture of a strategy reshaping America's interior enforcement doctrine. Just days earlier, a federal appeals court had ruled against the Trump administration, blocking indiscriminate immigration stops and arrests in certain jurisdictions. That legal decision had been widely viewed as a setback for the White House. The raid in Los Angeles, executed just days later, could not be understood in isolation. It was a signal, a message to sanctuary cities, to immigrant communities, and to domestic opposition. The enforcement arm of the United States government was not deterred. It was adapting and escalating. But this escalation is not occurring in a vacuum. It is happening at a time when the very backbone of American agriculture is under extraordinary stress. Across rural America, farmers are sounding alarms. They are not just worried about seasonal labor shortages. They are worried about existential survival. The president's immigration crackdown, combined with the economic aftershocks of his trade policies, has triggered what some are calling a perfect storm in the American Farm Belt. And at the heart of it all is the complex entanglement of food, labor, and geopolitics. John Boyd, Jr., a longtime farmer and president of the National Black Farmers Association, recently described the landscape in unambiguous terms. He did not speak of policy theory or ideological positioning. He spoke of bankruptcies, of farm suicides, and of corn, wheat, and soybeans that no longer fetch prices that can sustain life. Boyd began farming in the year 1983. He has seen the 80s crisis. He has lived through the economic volatility of the 90s and the global price wars of the early 2000s. But now, he says, is the worst period he has ever seen. Because this is not just about crops. This is about consequences. The White House, in its push for tighter immigration enforcement, has effectively severed a key supply of manual agricultural labor. The workers targeted in raids are the same individuals who harvest American food. Tobacco in North Carolina, peppers in Arizona, strawberries in California. And the jobs, they are not being filled by Americans. Not by citizens in cities, not by workers in industrial states, and not by rural youth seeking other futures. This is not theory. It is reality. President Donald Trump himself acknowledged this dynamic. In a public statement, he remarked that inner-city residents are not doing that work, and that migrant workers do it naturally. He recounted asking a farmer what happens when one of these laborers injures their back. The response? They do not get a bad back, sir, because if they do, they die. This statement, raw in its delivery, was not just inflammatory. It was revealing. It exposed a vision of labor in which certain populations are instrumentalized, not as contributors to national development, but as biological assets valued solely for what they can endure, not who they are. That is not merely a labor policy. It is a hierarchy, one that echoes with uncomfortable historical precedent. And it did not go unnoticed. Boyd responded on record, linking the treatment of today's migrant workers to that of sharecroppers under the Jim Crow system. He noted that the same populations the government is now detaining are the ones who have been harvesting American fields for generations. They are not new arrivals. They are not criminals. They are the people who perform the labor that others refuse to do. But the problem extends beyond morality. There is an economic cost, and it is rising. Under the Trump administration's tariffs, markets for corn, wheat, and soybeans have been destabilized. Before the trade war with China, soybeans sold at over $16 per bushel. That price collapsed, at one point falling below $8. The markets never returned. Boyd pointed out that foreign buyers, notably China, redirected their purchasing power to Brazil and other competitors. And the structural damage to American market share has not been repaired. At the same time, input costs for farming have reached their highest levels in decades. Fertilizer, fuel, machinery, seed. A season begins deeper in depth and ends with thinner margins. For many farmers, there is no margin at all. They are walking off their land, not because of climate change, not because of technological disruption, but because the geopolitical strategies of their own government have rendered their business model unviable. And yet, the administration is doubling down. Rather than relax immigration policy to stabilize labor supply, it is exploring more complex solutions. Among them, a touchback policy, under which migrants would be required to exit the country, then re-enter legally under a structured visa. It is a bureaucratic fiction designed to preserve political posture while acknowledging, at least in practice, that the labor cannot be replaced. But such half measures satisfy no one. For the migrant workers, it introduces fear and instability. For the farmers, it offers no guarantee of reliable labor. And for markets, it deepens uncertainty. The central problem is that America's immigration policy is no longer just a border issue. It is a domestic economic issue, an agricultural viability issue, and a foreign policy variable. Because as long as the United States fails to stabilize its agricultural production, its ability to influence global food markets declines, and that has strategic consequences. Food exports have long been a tool of American influence. They underwrite trade leverage. They secure alliances. They project stability. But if Brazil replaces American soybeans, if Canadian wheat finds permanent buyers in Asia, if labor instability causes export reliability to collapse, then American food becomes less powerful, less strategic, and that loss of power cannot be recovered easily. Meanwhile, the political landscape is shifting. The very states that form the president's electoral base are the ones suffering the most. The Farm Belt, which delivered Donald Trump victory in 2016 and again in 2020, is now under pressure. Boyd warned that many of these red states may soon face liquidation auction. Farms that cannot survive low commodity prices will be lost, and the consequences of that loss are irreversible, because once land is sold, it rarely returns to family control. Once a generation of farmers exits, they are not replaced. This is not just a cycle, it is a tipping point, one that will reshape the landscape of American agriculture for decades. The administration has suggested that new rules are forthcoming. Regulations on migrant farm labor, perhaps new visa categories, perhaps incentives to mechanize. But these measures are late, and many argue they are insufficient because the damage has already been done. The raids have created fear. The tariffs have destroyed markets. The rhetoric has severed trust, and the vacuum is being filled by competitors abroad, by automation at home, and by a narrative that paints the United States as unreliable. That may be the greatest cost of all, because in geopolitics, perception is power. If the world believes that American policy is volatile, if buyers fear sudden tariffs or abrupt visa suspensions, they will hedge. They will diversify. They will retreat. And once those supply chains realign, they do not snap back. Which brings us back to the truck in Los Angeles. It was not just a raid. It was an image of a government choosing force over reform, of a system willing to use deception against its own labor base, and of a nation turning inward at a moment when its influence abroad depends on cohesion at home. The price of that image is still unfolding, but make no mistake, it will be measured in markets lost, in farms foreclosed, and in the quiet erosion of strategic credibility. This is cold logic. Not all wars are fought with weapons. Some are lost in silence.